You know, the American dream. It's this phrase we hear all the time, an idea that's pretty much baked into the DNA of a nation. But have you ever stopped to think about where it actually came from, or what it really means for us today? Well, we're going to unpack this iconic and, yeah, deeply complicated idea.
Okay, so this is the classic definition, right? It comes from a historian, James Truslow Adams, who wrote this way back in 1931, smack in the middle of the Great Depression. And what it's really getting at is this vision of pure meritocracy, of boundless opportunity. It was this powerful, shining beacon of hope when the country was in one of its darkest moments.
And that right there, that's the big question we're tackling. Is this powerful idea something that's actually achievable? Or is it more of a carefully constructed myth, one that maybe serves purposes we don't always see? So let's look at this whole thing through that lens.
To really get it, we've got to go back to the beginning. Because the version of the dream most of us think of today, the house, the white picket fence, that wasn't the original plan at all. It was actually forged.
So, the very first version of this dream, it wasn't about cities at all. It was all about farming. Thomas Jefferson's big idea was a nation built on these self-reliant farmers, people who were connected to their own land, who were independent and free. It was a dream of soil, not suburbs.
And, for a good long while, that vision was reality. Back in 1860, before the Civil War, only about 1 in every 6 Americans lived in a city. That Jeffersonian ideal of the independent farmer, that was the main way of life.
But then, boom, everything changed. The Industrial Revolution kicked into high gear, and suddenly factories and the cities needed tons of workers. So in just 40 years, the number of people in cities just exploded. Suddenly, that old farmer's dream just couldn't compete with the magnetic pull of the city.
But here's the thing. This new dream, the one with the suburbs and all that, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was actually politically engineered. See, in the 1920s, after the Russian Revolution, there was this big fear of Bolshevism, and American leaders wanted to give regular people a literal stake in the capitalist system.
And they weren't exactly subtle about it. The Coolidge administration basically came right out and said it. Home ownership equals national stability. The thinking was, hey, if you've got a mortgage to pay, you're probably not going to be out there starting a revolution, right? The dream house literally became a political tool.
But, of course, there's always a catch. This shiny new dream, it had a really dark side. Because alongside all that promise of prosperity, a much, much harsher reality was taking shape for millions of people.
On one hand, you had these incredible symbols of success, like the Woolworth Building in New York. They called it the Cathedral of Commerce. It was the tallest building in the world at the time, this massive testament to the power and the optimism of the new urban age.
But you just had to look down from those magnificent skylines to see the other side of the coin. This quote describing tenement garbage, it just paints this brutal picture of the filth and disease and poverty that was just as much a part of the city as the skyscrapers. It was like the dream and the nightmare were literally living on top of each other.
And believe me, this massive contradiction did not go unnoticed, especially by America's greatest writers. Think about it. F. Scott Fitzgerald showed the empty, moral decay behind all the glamorous parties. Arthur Miller gave us Willy Loman, the tragic hero crushed by the pressure to succeed. They used their work to really critique this whole idea, showing how the dream wasn't an inspiration, but something that could absolutely crush you.
All right, so let's fast forward to today. The biggest challenge to the American dream has kind of shifted. Now the very key that was supposed to unlock it for millions has for so many people become a trap.
For generations, the playbook seemed pretty simple, right? Get a good education, land a good job, and you are on your way. But that path isn't so clear anymore. Sure, education is more important than ever, but its staggering cost has put up a huge barrier.
And if you look at the numbers, the story they tell is, well, it's pretty stark. Between the early 80s and 2006, the cost of college just skyrocketed by almost 440%. In that same time, family income only went up about 147%. You don't have to be a math genius to see that the numbers just don't add up anymore. The ladder to success now has a crushing price of admission.
And all of this has led people to talk about student debt in a really different and kind of provocative way. Some critics are now calling it a modern form of indentured servitude. The idea is that in chasing a better life, people get locked into these massive debts that control their futures, debts that you can't even get rid of through bankruptcy most of the time.
This quote from Elizabeth Warren really gets at just how aggressive and unforgiving the system can feel. To say that these debt collectors have power that would make a mobster envious, that really tells you something about how the pursuit of the dream can turn into this lifelong financial burden.
So where does that leave us? Well, the 2008 financial crisis really threw everything into chaos, and the American dream itself got put under a giant microscope. What came out the other side was an idea that had been fractured, redefined, and in a lot of ways, completely hijacked.
So after the crash, we basically had this huge national what are we doing moment. First, people started calling the dream out, saying the whole thing was a lie that helped cause the crisis. Then, the definition shifted. It wasn't about a house anymore, it was just about having a stable job. And finally, the powerful idea of the dream got co-opted by politicians and companies for their own agendas.
And this Time magazine cover? Man, it just perfectly captured how everyone was feeling. It asked the question that was on everybody's mind. Can you still move up in America? That core promise of the dream, upward mobility, it felt broken. It felt like the ladder of opportunity was suddenly missing a whole lot of rungs.
You know, for all of this, the idea of the American dream is amazingly resilient. It's been torn apart, put back together, and twisted around, but it just won't go away. Which brings us back to the biggest question for our time, really. If the dream is still alive, who is it actually for? And what on earth does it promise now?